To teach her a lesson, the master married his rebellious daughter to Selva, the lowly slave. The ending left everyone speechless. On a cotton plantation where silence was enforced and obedience was law, one decision shattered every rule the South believed unbreakable. A proud master, desperate to tame his defiant daughter, chose a punishment so unthinkable it froze the blood of everyone who heard it. A marriage, not of love, not of mercy, but of control. She was born to privilege. He was born in chains. And between them stood secrets whispered after midnight. A master's wife with her own hidden agenda, and a young man who loved where he was forbidden to look. What followed would haunt the land long after the vows were spoken. This is a story told in hushed tones, as if the wind itself fears repeating it too loudly. It unfolds in the American South of the 1800s, where power ruled openly and humanity survived quietly. Every character you will meet carries a private burden, some visible, some carefully hidden. Love here is dangerous. Defiance is costly. And justice, when it arrives, does not come in the shape anyone expects. Listen closely, for this is not merely a tale of punishment, but of transformation. If you enjoy deep, emotional historical stories like this, please like this story, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us. The year was 1847, and the Hawthorne Plantation stretched wide beneath a bruised southern sky. White columns guarded the master's house like silent sentinels, while beyond them, rows of cotton bent under the weight of forced labor. It was here that Selva lived, quiet, observant, and known among the enslaved for his steady hands and careful words. He was young, but his eyes carried an old patience, shaped by years of listening more than speaking. Inside the grand house lived Eliza Hawthorne, the master's only daughter. Unlike the women expected to smile and obey, Eliza questioned everything. She spoke too freely, read forbidden pamphlets, and looked directly at people others refused to see. Her defiance unsettled her father, Master Charles Hawthorne, a man who believed control was love and obedience was virtue. Watching all of this from the shadows was Margaret Hawthorne, the master's wife. Gentle in voice, but sharp in mind, she saw the tension growing like a storm that could no longer be ignored. And then there was Thomas Reed, the overseer's son, caught between loyalty and conscience, friendship and fear. None of them yet understood that a single decision, made in anger, would bind their lives together forever. The days following that tense season at Hawthorne Plantation carried a strange heaviness, as though the land itself sensed an approaching rupture. Morning bells rang as always, summoning the enslaved to the fields, yet conversations faltered and eyes lingered too long on the big house. Something was changing, and everyone felt it. Selva noticed it first in the way Eliza Hawthorne no longer walked the veranda with her usual fire. She had always moved with defiance, chin high, steps firm, but now her shoulders carried a quiet strain. Still, when her path crossed Selva's near the old magnolia tree, her gaze held steady. "Good morning," she said one afternoon, softly enough that only he could hear. Selva hesitated. Speaking freely to the master's daughter was dangerous, yet something in her voice felt human, not commanding. "Good morning, Miss Eliza," he replied, lowering his eyes out of habit. "You don't have to look away," she said gently. "Not with me." Those words lingered with Selva long after the moment passed. He did not yet understand why, only that they warmed a place inside him he had learned to keep cold. Meanwhile, Thomas Reed, the overseer's son, struggled with his own conflict. Raised to enforce rules he no longer believed in, Thomas often found himself lingering near Selva under the excuse of work assignments. They had grown up near one another, separated by status but joined by circumstance. "You should be careful," Thomas warned Selva one evening as the sun dipped low. "People are watching more closely these days." Selva nodded. "They always are." But Thomas was watching too, watching the way Eliza paused when Selva passed, the way Selva listened when she spoke, and the way Master Hawthorne's temper flared at the smallest sign of disobedience from his daughter. Inside the house, Margaret Hawthorne observed everything. She noticed how Eliza lingered at the window overlooking the quarters, how her husband's voice sharpened whenever Eliza challenged his authority. Margaret herself had once been a woman with questions. Before marriage taught her the cost of asking them aloud. One evening, as candles flickered in the parlor, the storm finally broke. "I will not marry him," Eliza said, her voice calm but unyielding. Master Hawthorne rose from his chair so suddenly it scraped loudly across the floor. "You will do as you are told. This family's name is not yours to gamble with." "I am not property," Eliza replied. "I will not be traded like land or cotton." The word property hung in the air like a spark near dry straw. Margaret stepped forward. "Charles, enough. She is your daughter. She is my responsibility," he snapped. "And I will not allow rebellion under my own roof." That night, Master Hawthorne walked the plantation grounds alone, anger feeding on wounded pride. He passed the quarters, heard laughter abruptly stop, felt eyes withdraw into darkness. His gaze landed on Selva, who was repairing a fence under moonlight, steady and silent. An idea, cold, sharp, and absolute, took root. The next morning, the plantation gathered in uneasy silence as Master Hawthorne announced his decision. His voice carried across the yard, deliberate and unshaking. "My daughter has forgotten her place," he declared. "So I will remind her. She will be married." A murmur rippled through the crowd until he finished the sentence. "Selva." Gasps followed. Eliza froze, blood draining from her face. Selva's hand stilled, his breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. Thomas felt the ground shift beneath him. Margaret's heart sank, for she understood what this was, not justice, but cruelty disguised as order. "You cannot mean this," Eliza whispered. "I do," her father replied, "and it will be done." That night, Selva sat alone outside the quarters, staring at the stars. He had survived many things, but this felt like stepping into a storm with no shelter. He knew the danger of becoming a symbol, a punishment made flesh. Eliza, confined to her room, pressed her forehead to the glass. Fear warred with resolve inside her. She had challenged her father many times, but never imagined the cost would be shared with someone who had no choice at all. In the darkness, Margaret made a quiet vow to herself. If this marriage was meant to break her daughter, she would find a way to protect what remained. And as the plantation slept uneasily, the path toward an unthinkable union was set, one that would expose secrets, shift loyalties, and ignite emotions no one could control. The day of the wedding arrived under a sky the color of dull steel, as though even the heavens refused to bless what was about to occur. No music played across Hawthorne Plantation. No joy gathered in the air. Instead, silence pressed down heavily, broken only by the distant creak of wagon wheels and the low murmur of uneasy breath. Selva stood near the old oak by the edge of the yard, dressed in a plain but clean shirt Margaret Hawthorne had quietly arranged for him. His hands trembled despite his effort to still them. Never in his life had he been given a choice, yet never had he felt the weight of being used so cruelly as now. This marriage was not honor. It was a warning. Across the yard, Eliza emerged from the house. She wore a simple ivory dress, stripped of lace and finery, chosen deliberately by her father to remind her of her fall from privilege. Still, she walked with her spine straight, her eyes clear. Fear lived in her chest, but so did resolve. Their eyes met. In that moment, something shifted, something neither punishment nor power could command. Selva saw not a master's daughter, but a woman standing against a fate forced upon her. Eliza saw not a lowly slave, but a man trapped in her father's cruelty as much as she was. The ceremony was brief, spoken by a local preacher who dared not object. Master Hawthorne stood rigid, his satisfaction thinly veiled behind stern composure. "I do," Eliza said, her voice steady. "I do," Selva echoed, the words heavy yet sincere. When it was done, a ripple passed through the gathered crowd. Some looked away in disbelief. Others stared openly, knowing they were witnessing something that would be spoken of in whispers for generations. That evening, Selva was given a small, unused cabin at the edge of the property. Eliza was sent there as well, not as a bride welcomed, but as a daughter cast out. Inside the cabin, silence wrapped around them. "I am sorry," Eliza said at last. her voice breaking. This should never have happened to you. Selva shook his head slowly. None of this is your fault. But we must be careful. This place watches everything. She nodded. Then we survive it together. Days passed. The plantation buzzed with rumor. Some expected violence. Others expected humiliation. Instead, something unexpected unfolded. Selva treated Eliza not as property, nor as punishment, but as a partner. He spoke to her with respect, listened when she spoke, shared stories of his childhood, of a mother who once sang by firelight before she was sold away. Eliza listened, truly listened, and for the first time, Selva felt seen. Thomas Reed watched from afar, torn apart by guilt and admiration. One night, he confronted his father. "This is wrong," Thomas said. "You know it is." The overseer's face hardened. "Keep your voice down. This plantation survives on order." "No," Thomas replied. "It survives on silence. And silence is breaking." Margaret Hawthorne, meanwhile, began to act. She brought books to Eliza under the guise of sewing visits. She passed food to Selva men for others. And one night, she revealed a truth that changed everything. "Eliza," she whispered, candlelight flickering between them, "your father's power is not as absolute as he pretends. There are debts, deeds hidden, men who would turn on him if the truth came out." Eliza's breath caught. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because this marriage was meant to destroy you," Margaret said quietly, "and I will not let that be the ending." The climax came suddenly, violently. One afternoon, Master Hawthorne accused Selva of defiance, of walking too freely, of standing too tall. He ordered punishment in front of the entire plantation. Eliza stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "If you lay a hand on him," she said, voice ringing across the yard, "you will answer for everything." Her father laughed. "To whom?" "To the truth," she replied. Margaret moved then, stepping beside Eliza. Thomas followed. And before Hawthorne could react, Margaret spoke the words she had hidden for years, of forged papers, stolen land, and crimes buried under cotton fields. The crowd stirred. Authority cracked. Master Hawthorne's face drained of color. For the first time, fear replaced rage. Selva stood still, heart pounding, realizing the punishment meant to erase him had instead made him impossible to ignore. The storm had broken, and nothing, would ever be the same again. The words Margaret Hawthorne had spoken did not fade when the air grew still. They lingered, heavy, undeniable, settling over the plantation like ash after a fire. No one moved at first. Even the cicadas seemed to pause, as if the land itself waited to see who would speak next. Master Charles Hawthorne stood frozen, his authority stripped bare in front of those he had ruled for decades. His mouth opened once, then closed. The confidence that had always armored him cracked, revealing something smaller beneath it. "This is madness," he finally said, forcing a laugh that convinced no one. "Idle threats. Lies spoken by women and boys who forget their place." But the crowd had changed. The overseers avoided his eyes. Enslaved men and women, usually trained to look away, watched him openly now, not with defiance, but with awareness. Something irreversible had occurred. The truth had been named. Thomas Reed stepped forward, his voice shaking yet clear. "I've seen the ledgers," he said. "The altered records, the land taken under false claims." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Margaret's shoulders relaxed just slightly. She had not stood alone after all. Master Hawthorne's gaze snapped toward Selva, sharp and accusing. "This was your doing," he spat. "You turned them against me." Selva did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I only stood where you forced me to stand," he replied. Everything else was already there. That restraint unsettled Hawthorne more than anger ever could. Within hours, the plantation fell into a tense suspension. Riders were sent to neighboring estates. Word traveled faster than expected, about the marriage, about the accusations, about a master losing his grip. Eliza and Selva were ordered back to their cabin, not as punishment, but as containment. Inside, Eliza paced the narrow room while Selva watched the door, alert to every sound. "I never wanted this to become a spectacle," Eliza said softly. I only wanted to be heard. Selva nodded. Sometimes being heard changes more than we intend. That night, Margaret came to them under cover of darkness. She carried bread, water, and news. Your father has sent for men from the county, she said. He hopes to silence this before it grows. Eliza's jaw tightened. Then he still believes he can control the ending. Margaret looked at Selva. And you? Selva considered the question carefully. I believe the ending no longer belongs to him. Outside, tension tightened like a drawn wire. Some enslaved families were quietly moved deeper into the quarters, as if distance could shield them from consequence. Others whispered plans of escape, of endurance, of watching closely. Thomas confronted his father again, this time without fear. If they come, Thomas said, I will speak. The overseer studied his son for a long moment, then nodded once. So will I. Morning arrived with unexpected calm. Instead of armed men, a single carriage rolled onto the property, carrying a county official known for his rigid devotion to law. He requested documents. Deeds? Accounts. Master Hawthorne complied stiffly, sweat darkening his collar. Each paper examined chipped away at his certainty. By afternoon, the official's expression had hardened. These matters require further investigation, he announced. Until then, certain authorities are suspended. It was not an arrest. It was not justice, not yet, but it was a beginning. That evening, Selva and Eliza stood outside their cabin, watching the sunset bleed gold into the fields. Neither spoke for a long time. I don't know what tomorrow holds, Eliza finally said. Selva glanced at her, then back at the horizon. I know what yesterday held, he said. And I know we are not there anymore. Their bond had shifted, not born of romance alone, but of shared survival. Respect had grown where fear once lived, trust where silence once ruled. Margaret watched them from a distance, her heart heavy but hopeful. She had lived long enough to know that change was slow, often painful, but once begun, it resisted erasure. Master Hawthorne remained inside the big house that night, alone. The walls that once echoed with command now reflected only his breathing. For the first time, power felt fragile. The punishment meant to humiliate had instead exposed everything. And as darkness settled over Hawthorne Plantation, one truth became clear to all who lived there. The fall had begun, but the ending had yet to be written. Morning came gently over Hawthorne Plantation, soft light spilling across cotton fields now tinged with a quiet stillness. The chaos of the previous days had subsided, leaving in its place something more profound. Reckoning. The plantation was no longer a place of simple order and obedience. It had become a landscape of consequences, of choices, and of new possibilities. Selva walked through the quarters, nodding to men and women who met his gaze with respect rather than fear. Something had shifted, not overnight, but in the smallest, most human ways. Children ran past him, laughing freely, as if sensing that the boundaries that had once kept them contained were loosening. And everywhere, whispers of the marriage remained, less as scandal and more as symbol. A moment that reminded all that even the deepest chains could be challenged. Inside the cabin, Eliza moved quietly, tending to chores she had once considered beneath her. She had learned a humility she had not sought, yet it gave her strength. She and Selva now shared silent routines, fetching water, tending small garden plots, speaking in measured words that carried new meaning. The fear of yesterday had been replaced by a cautious confidence, and in that, their bond grew, not from obligation, but from understanding, mutual respect, and a shared fight for dignity. Margaret Hawthorne remained a steady presence, her quiet interventions ensuring that no harm came to Selva or her daughter. She had carefully documented everything, anticipating the investigations that would soon follow. Her loyalty to truth had reshaped the very structure of her household, and with it, her sense of self. Master Hawthorne, meanwhile, faced the consequences of a life built on control and fear. The county investigation dragged on, exposing financial mismanagement, misdeeds, and the limits of his authority. He walked the halls of his big house with a measured caution he had never known. Anger burned in him still, but it was tempered by the awareness that power, no matter how absolute it seems, can falter in the light of truth. Thomas Reed stood quietly in the shadows of these changes. His loyalty had shifted from blind obedience to conscience, and he now understood that courage could be far more dangerous and far more rewarding than silence. One evening, Selva and Eliza sat on the steps of their cabin, watching fireflies flicker across the yard. "I never thought it could end like this," Eliza said softly. "I expected punishment, fear, hatred." Selva smiled faintly. "Sometimes the storm brings something unexpected. Sometimes we survive it together." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, they shared a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them. A bond born not of comfort, but of endurance, respect, and the courage to stand firm against injustice. In the following weeks, small changes rippled through the plantation. Some enslaved people were quietly granted freedoms or relocated to safer places under Margaret's careful guidance. Others found solace in the knowledge that defiance could exist even under the most oppressive circumstances. And as for Eliza, she learned the weight of privilege, the cost of rebellion, and the resilience required to find her own voice in a world determined to silence it. Selva, too, discovered new strength, not in rebellion against the master, but in holding steadfast to integrity and humanity. He had been a man bound by chains, yet now he understood that freedom is not always granted by law. It is claimed through courage, respect, and survival. Master Hawthorne, humbled and shaken, began to retreat into his private world. He no longer sought to impose terror as authority. Instead, he became a man haunted by the realization that the bonds he tried to command were stronger than he could control. The plantation would endure, but under new awareness, and he would always carry the memory of his daughter and Selva's unwavering presence. Eliza and Selva's union, forced though it had been, became the unlikely anchor for change. They never married out of love alone, yet the respect, trust, and courage they shared made their connection unbreakable. And while whispers remained, they were now whispers of admiration, of disbelief at what had been endured and what had been survived. In quiet moments, Eliza would recall the anger and frustration that had sparked her rebellion, but she now carried it differently, as understanding, tempered by empathy for those around her. Selva, ever observant, continued to guide with patience, his steady presence reminding everyone that the true measure of strength lies not in domination, but in honor. And thus, Hawthorne Plantation settled into a fragile, but promising, new order, one where courage, truth, and respect held more power than fear or authority ever had. Years passed over Hawthorne Plantation, each season layering change like sediment over old soil. The cotton still grew in endless rows, white as winter snow, but the plantation itself was transformed, not entirely, but irrevocably. The story of Selva and Eliza, whispered at first in disbelief, had become a quiet legend, carried from house to quarters, from visitor to visitor, as proof that even the strictest rules could be bent by courage and conscience. Selva and Eliza remained together, not as a marriage born of passion, but of survival, respect, and unspoken loyalty. The bond between them, forged in the furnace of punishment and injustice, had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. By day, Selva worked the fields with steady hands, but his mind now carried strategy, knowledge, and an awareness that his life mattered, even under oppression. Eliza, once proud and defiant, had learned humility without surrendering strength. She became a bridge between two worlds, the privilege of her birth and the humanity of those her father had once ruled without question. Margaret Hawthorne lived quietly, her influence subtle but enduring. She had guided the household through peril without overt defiance, showing that quiet courage could reshape lives. Her interventions, books hidden in drawers, whispered advice, food left for Selva, discreet protection for the enslaved, had been the backbone of the change that unfolded. She had preserved her family's survival while quietly redefining morality on the plantation, teaching that power could be wielded with conscience rather than cruelty. Thomas Reed, the overseer's son, had become a man of conscience, his loyalties redefined. He refused the blind obedience that had once governed his choices, instead standing beside truth, regardless of consequence. He remained a silent witness to Selva and Eliza's growing partnership, knowing that courage was contagious, even if it came quietly. Master Charles Hawthorne lived out his days haunted by his decisions. Though the plantation remained under his name, he no longer wielded unquestioned authority. Legal investigations and community scrutiny had eroded his power. He had learned, slowly and painfully, that fear could never secure loyalty, and that love forced by control was not love at all. In quiet moments, he would recall his daughter's unwavering gaze in Selva's quiet strength, a reminder that authority is fleeting when confronted by truth. For the enslaved men and women of Hawthorne, the story of Selva and Eliza became a beacon. It did not undo chains, but it showed that dignity, courage, and mutual respect could exist even under oppression. Small freedoms were granted, opportunities quietly protected, and for the first time, a sense of justice, however limited, threaded through daily life. Children grew up knowing that rebellion, intelligence, and bravery could survive, even flourish, when wielded with care and resolve. In the quiet evenings, Selva and Eliza often walked the perimeter of the plantation together, watching the sun melt behind distant trees, reflecting on how far they had come. Words were often unnecessary. Understanding, born of shared hardship, flowed between them in glances and silence. They had survived punishment, witnessed cruelty, endured injustice, and found in one another a partner not chosen by society, but by circumstance and mutual respect. The plantation itself became a living reminder that change could come from the unlikeliest of places. Where once there had been blind obedience and fear, there now existed vigilance, awareness, and, most importantly, humanity. The story of the rebellious daughter and the lowly slave became more than rumor. It became legend, a quiet lesson to those who came after, that courage and integrity are more enduring than power, and that respect forged under fire can outlast oppression. And so, as the years continued, the plantation breathed differently. Selva and Eliza's lives intertwined in ways neither had expected, proving that forced circumstances could evolve into mutual strength. Margaret's quiet wisdom remained a guiding force. Thomas's courage continued to ripple quietly, and even Master Hawthorne was left to reckon with the weight of his own pride. The ending of their story was not dramatic in the way some might imagine. There were no grand proclamations, no sudden revolutions, only the subtle, enduring triumph of dignity over tyranny and respect over cruelty. And for those who witnessed it, or heard it whispered on warm southern nights, it was enough. It was more than enough. Hawthorne Plantation endured, but its legacy was no longer only of chains and control. It had been reshaped by courage, by truth, and by two people who, against all odds, taught everyone around them that even in a world built on hierarchy and fear, humanity could prevail.